Today's Bible study is looking into the book of Genesis chapter 21. For this study we'll be using the English Standard Version. Genesis 21 marks a significant turning point in the story of Abraham, Sarah, and the fulfillment of God's promise regarding Isaac. This chapter also involves the sorrowful separation of Hagar and Ishmael, the provision of God in the wilderness, and a treaty between Abraham and Abimelech. Each section is filled with theological depth, prophetic significance, and the unfolding plan of redemption. The chapter opens with these powerful words: "The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised." This opening emphasizes God's faithfulness. What he had promised decades earlier is now being fulfilled. The repetition of the phrases "as he had said" and "as he had promised" is not just poetic, but it stresses the certainty and reliability of God's word. Sarah, who had laughed in disbelief when the promise of a child was first spoken, now experiences the joy of its fulfillment. Sarah conceives and gives birth to a son in her old age. Abraham is 100 years old when his son is born. They name the child Isaac, which means he laughs, a fitting name considering the earlier laughter of both Abraham and Sarah. But now laughter is no longer tied to doubt, it is tied to joy. Sarah declares, "God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me." This is a testimony to God's miraculous intervention. Sarah was barren, past the age of childbearing, and yet she becomes the mother of the promised son. Her joy is not private but communal. Others will rejoice with her, seeing what God has done. Abraham circumcises Isaac when he is 8 days old, just as God commanded in Genesis 17. This act, really signifies the covenant between God and Abraham's descendants. It connects Isaac to the covenantal promises and, it absolutely affirms his position as the chosen heir. As Isaac grows and is weaned, Abraham holds a great feast. In that cultural context, the weaning of a child was a significant milestone, typically occurring between 2 to 3 years of age. It was a time of celebration, and in this moment the joy surrounding Isaac reaches a peak. However, this joy is quickly contrasted by conflict. Sarah sees Ishmael, the son of Hagar the Egyptian, laughing or mocking. The Hebrew word used here can imply derision or scorn. Whether Ishmael was mocking Isaac or simply acting in a way that Sarah found inappropriate, the tension between the two sons becomes evident. Sarah demands that Abraham cast out Hagar and her son. She says, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." This may sound harsh, but it echoes what Paul will later use in Galatians chapter 4, verses 29 to 30, to contrast the son of the flesh and the son of the promise. There is a theological dimension at play here. Isaac represents the miraculous work of God, the fulfillment of promise, while Ishmael represents human effort and the flesh. Abraham is distressed over Sarah's request, especially because Ishmael is still his son. But God speaks to Abraham and tells him not to be displeased. God affirms that Isaac is the child through whom the covenant will continue. However, God also promises to make a nation of Ishmael because he is Abraham's offspring. So Abraham rises early in the morning, gives Hagar bread and a skin of water, and sends her away with Ishmael. This is a heartbreaking moment, but it highlights the consequences of trying to fulfill God's promise through human means. Even though Hagar and Ishmael are not part of the covenantal line, God still cares for them and provides for them. As they wander in the wilderness of Beersheba, their water runs out. Hagar places the boy under a bush and sits down a distance away, saying, "Let me not look on the death of the child." She weeps. This is, one of the most moving scenes in the Old Testament. A mother, absolutely helpless, watching her son about to die of thirst. But God hears the voice of the boy. The angel of God calls to Hagar from heaven and says, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. God opens her eyes and she sees a well of water. She fills the skin and gives the boy a drink. God sustains them. Ishmael grows up in the wilderness and becomes an expert with the bow. Hagar finds him a wife from the land of Egypt. Though separated from the covenant line, Ishmael is not abandoned by God. He becomes the father of a great nation, fulfilling the promise God made to Abraham. The chapter then transitions to a political and diplomatic event. Abimelech, the king who previously dealt with Abraham in Gerar, comes with his commander Phicol to make a treaty with Abraham. Abimelech recognizes that God is with Abraham in all that he does. He wants to establish peace and ensure fairness. Abraham agrees to the treaty, but brings up a dispute over a well that Abimelech's servants had seized. Abimelech denies knowledge of it, and Abraham sets aside 7 ewe lambs as a witness that he dug the well. This act formalizes ownership and respect. The place is named Beersheba, which means well of the oath or well of 7. It marks both a physical and spiritual milestone. Abraham plants a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and calls on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. This is significant. The planting of the tree may symbolize stability, permanence, and worship. It shows that Abraham is not merely a nomadic wanderer, but is beginning to settle and establish a legacy. Calling on the name of the Lord reveals Abraham's continued faith and devotion. Despite all the ups and downs, delayed promises, family tension, the near loss of his son Ishmael and foreign alliances, Abraham remains faithful to the God who is faithful to him. Genesis chapter 21 ends by saying, "And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines." In this chapter, we see the fulfillment of God's word in the birth of Isaac, the separation of the son of the flesh from the son of the promise, and the ever-present provision of God, even for those outside the covenant. We also witness Abraham's growth as a man of faith and integrity. He obeys God even when it hurts, he makes peace when possible, and he worships the Lord in the land where God has placed him. This chapter reminds us that God always keeps his promises. Even when the path is difficult or delayed, his word never fails. It reminds us that God's care extends beyond the boundaries we set. He heard Hagar's cry, saw her suffering, and responded with mercy. And it reminds us that obedience, even in moments of grief or conflict, brings us closer to God's unfolding plan. If you enjoyed this Bible study, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment about what you think of this Bible study.